Hi guys, so today's video is going to be a non-spoiler book review and then later a spoilery chat for Traitor'S by Sebastien De Castell. Before I get into the bulk of the review, I do really need to start this off by talking about a personal preference for me and how that personal preference, I'm sure, has affected how I feel about this book. So I'm just going to get this part out of the way and then I'll get into the regular book review. And the thing that I'm talking about is how rape is played out in a story and how it is handled. I'm not one of these people who feels that you can't ever show anything of that sort in stories. Sadly, it is a reality for a lot of people, and I hate that that is a fact, but I don't know that shying away from realizing that it exists is something that I necessarily would advocate for. But what I do want when seeing it in books is that it's handled with care, and the way in which it was handled in this book, there's two instances that I'm going to reference. If you don't care about this part, if you feel like this might be considered spoilers, I'll have a timestamp where you can skip over this part. But the way in which both instances were handled, I can't get on board with. So I'm going to start with the one that some people might not even really consider rape, because of the fact that the victim is a man and he doesn't seem all that upset about it. But what ends up happening is there's this scene with our main character, his name is Falchio, and he is injured and he encounters this woman out of nowhere. And she is this priestess, and her role is that she is this prostitute who has the ability to heal people through sex. And so he is injured and he encounters this woman, like I said, out of nowhere. She seems to have this prophetic understanding that they were going to meet and cross paths. She ends up strapping him down to a bed. She straps his arms and his legs, and he repeatedly tells her to stop and that he doesn't want her to do this. She gets on top of him. She starts doing things to him anyway, and he continues to tell her not to do it. And then after a while, eventually he's like, seems fine with it. And then after that happens, the next day, he's all healed up and he feels better, and she professes essentially her love to him, this woman he just met. And she talks about how she has healed him, and not only in his physical wounds, but she has healed his inability to let people love him again. And he is really wanting this life that she is proposing to him, like, let's move away to this one island, it's magical and peaceful there, and we'll be happy. And he really wants to do this, but he's like, but I have this obligation to this other thing I have to do. And then she's like crying and sad, like he broke her heart. And I just was like, what the heck is happening? I truly do feel that if this scene were a woman and she was strapped down after being injured to a bed, and a man started doing things to her and was like, just take it because it's gonna heal you, I cannot see people being okay with that, and I don't care if the person is a man or woman. I don't care if in the story after it happens they're like, I'm grateful it happened. I don't care. I can't get behind that, because there are people who their consent is taken away, or when they say no, people don't listen. And to think that in this book it's like no big deal, or we don't care because it's a guy, I can't handle it. So that was the most intense thing. The other thing is something that I think it's just kind of something we see pretty often in stories. And this one, there's a lot more to it. And I weirdly wouldn't even say this one bothered me the same way that the other one did, the other scene. But this still kind of frustrated me a little bit, especially given how this other scene played out. So earlier in the book, the book kind of goes back and forth between past and present, and we see that our main character at one time had been in love and married, and his wife was raped, and then she was taken by her rapists, and then you get the impression that she was going to be raped by all of these men, and either they did this to her and she resisted and they killed her, or because she resisted, they killed her. Either way, she was raped at least once, and our character was powerless to what was happening. This storyline, this concept is not the issue. It's the way in which this character, her only purpose was to be raped and murdered And we see this, and that's the only scene we really see with his wife. And the setup for it is there's a line where he's talking about his wife. Her name's Aline. It says, "Aline was wonderful and beautiful to me, and I won't waste your time describing her to you because you might not agree, at which point I would have to teach you the first rule of the sword, or worse, you might fall in love with her yourself. And that would bring you only a small piece of the sorrow that fills my life." And the reason that kind of rubbed me the wrong way is because we only see this woman once. We get flashbacks of our character with his king that he eventually goes on to serve, and we get lots of the king. So we see him as his own character. We see his morals and the person he is. And yet with his wife, this woman that he loved dearly, her only scene really in the book that is fleshed out is her being raped. We don't even get to know anything about her. It really felt like it was just using rape of a person, and I don't say woman, I just mean a person, to make this a sad thing in this person's main character's past. And I understand that it is sad, and I'm not the kind of person that thinks that if somebody you love is harmed in that way that you aren't allowed to feel sad. Of course you would feel sad about this, but it's just that this person, that was pretty much the only thing. The character never really thinks back fondly of the years they spent happily married. He never really he just only, the story only shows us her being raped and murdered so that we can see this small piece of the sorrow that fills his life. For me, people are more than being a victim, and they're more than the sexual abuse that they've had to go through. And I feel like this story, I don't think the author by any means was intending to perpetuate this idea of a victim is a victim, we should always feel bad for them, and that's all they are, is being a victim to this terrible thing that someone else did to them. I don't think that was his goal whatsoever. And I really think that it was more of that he was trying to show that our character has gone through some terrible times in his life, and he has lost people he very much cares about. I just found that with that happening early on, and then later the scene with the prostitute priestess lady, and it just, a lot of that, even if I had loved the book, those two scenes, it is my personal hang-up. It would have ruined the book for me. I didn't care for the book otherwise regardless, but I really wanted to start off with this because I know that it likely has influenced how I'm going to speak of the book for the rest of the review. And so I only think it's fair that you understand that I am aware I have a bias and that I don't handle those particular kinds of scenes very well. Okay, all of that pushed aside and getting into the rest of the book, because obviously those couple of instances were not the thing that made up the entirety of the book. So the premise is that we have this world where we had at one time a king who was noble and just, and he put together this group of individuals, men and women, called the Great Coats. And these people, they served the king's law. So they were different from knights or other figures like that because those people served people. But what made the Great Coats different is that they served the law. So they were kind of above knights in that sense. They were even more honorable and more just. Our main character, Falcio, it was always his dream to become a Great Coat. It was something that had been disbanded a long time ago, and he has the opportunity to become one later. But where we see him in present day, the Great Coats have been disbanded because a group of dukes and duchesses took the king's life and they took over his rule, and now the Great Coats have been disbanded. And so all his dreams have gone out the window, and worse is that when the king was killed, he did not want to fight against those that were taking over his throne, and he certainly didn't want his Great Coats to die for him. So he asked them to stand back and let it happen. And the rest of the world, they have seen knights as honorable people because knights serve individuals. They serve nobility, royalty, and knights would go to their death, whereas the Great Coats, they didn't do that. They let their king die. So now the rest of the world thinks you are cowards, you're pathetic, and everybody hates them now. Our main character, Falcio, before his king died, he gave him this mission to go after what he thinks are supposed to be these valuable jewels of some sort, but he has no idea what he's looking for. He just knows this was his king's last command for him. And so him and his two friends, Brassy and Kest, it's like almost a Three Musketeers setup. These three individuals, despite the hatred of the world, are trying to do their best to fulfill the king's last wish for Falchio, but things don't really go according to plan. After some attempts to run away from a framed murder on them, they end up sort of getting tied into this crazy purge in this one random city. And there's a little girl in this city who her entire family was killed except for her. And this purge goes on for 9 days. And the whole pretty much basis for this is to allow those in power to let anybody kill whoever they want during this time period. And it's really a way for them to get rid of their political rivals. This little girl's family, for some reason, Falchio doesn't understand, despite being lesser nobility, they obviously were meant to die during this time. This little girl lives, and there's still the rest of this week to go. So Falchio vows to protect this little girl. Throughout the book, we do get flashbacks primarily with Falchio and his king, and so you get to see why he cares so much about following the king's last wish, about trying to still uphold the laws because he was so loyal to this person and because he was so loyal to what this person believed in. And so it definitely builds some of Falchio's character. And one thing that I appreciate about the flashbacks is they were fairly brief. Sometimes when you get flashbacks in stories, they can be drawn out for so long and it could be a huge interruption to what's going on in present day. I did find that sometimes the setup for flashbacks felt a little contrived, a little forced, and it didn't really feel like it made that much sense with what was going on in present day for someone to be like, hey, so why do you even care about this one particular thing if you're a greatcoat? And he's like thinking back on his past and it's like, this is why I care. So sometimes it was a little heavy-handed. But one thing that I find with adult fantasy that can sometimes drive me crazy is that it feels like it's unnecessarily long. And this book was straight to the point almost all the time. It was fast-paced. There was tons of action scenes. The action scenes weren't done in a way that I really loved, but they were different and they were unique, which I appreciated. So it's in first person, and a lot of times our main character, obviously first person is, breaking the fourth wall, so to speak, because they're talking to you, but usually first person is, I did this, I did this, I did this, I think this. And in this case, a lot of times he'd be like, imagine this, or I know what you're thinking, how could it possibly be that? And it was kind of cheeky. And sometimes the action scenes were him kind of being clever and tricky and keeping you in on this little inside joke of what he was about to do. So the way in which the action scenes were approached, they always had a little bit of something different, a little different flavor in each of them, which I appreciated, but I also felt like the action scenes often didn't hold that much consequence, and often there being somebody or something that would arise to save people or our character or something that came up all the time. There was a lot of just convenient resolutions to problems. There is a little bit of a mystery in this story when it comes to the little girl he's trying to protect, because our character doesn't know why she's so important and why the people of the nobility of this particular city are so set in killing her. There's also some politicking going on with this one lady that is supposed to be the next queen, and they can pretty clearly tell that the dukes and duchesses are planning on using this girl as a puppet. So there's a lot of little other intricate things that I think we are getting the groundwork for the future books. And that didn't end up resulting in this one feeling entirely incomplete. I still think the bulk of the story revolved around protecting this young girl and getting to know Falchio a little bit more intimately through the flashbacks. But these other little pieces, if you are somebody who likes the story to feel fairly self-contained but are excited to see where those little details end up later, I think you'll appreciate that about this. The writing in the story, the narrative itself, like I said, we have this sort of letting you in on an inside joke type of narration because our main character is often communicating with you, the reader. And I think that whenever you have first person, it's important that if you end up having a really formal writing style, it just doesn't make you feel very connected to the character. But as a result of having a more casual writing style, it is more casual. It's not probably going to have a ton of really beautiful prose necessarily. There were a couple lines that I really liked. There was one in particular about how nobody in stories ever wants you to know, but a man will sleep his best when he knows he has failed. Something along those lines. And I really liked that quote because it was kind of dark and morbid, and I tend to like those sorts of lines in stories that are pretty bummer type lines. There were a few good lines here and there, but there were also a few times in the dialogue when characters will say each other's names, and often if they say each other's names too much, it reads really weird because when you are talking to somebody, you don't usually say their name to them over and over and over again. And there is one particular part where our character is talking to his king, and every single time the king spoke to him, he used his name, and it was really weird. I mean, usually you see it, sometimes if you see it a couple times within a couple of pages, you're like, oh, they're saying their name kind of a lot. But it was every single time he spoke within a pretty quick back and forth dialogue. So there were little things like that here and there. Also, because I think this is something that a lot of people, when they hear about the premise of the story and that it's almost like a Three Musketeers style setup, they're going to get this impression that there's going to be this great brotherly love between the three main characters. And it's not that there isn't. It's just that a lot of the book, they are not with each other. On the opposite side, when it comes to the villains, I think that the villains were quite evil. And I know not everybody loves really, really evil, not particularly nuanced villains. But at least with this book, I feel like the villains had a pretty good amount of power, and that does make for an interesting setup because sometimes evil people end up in power and they are very bad. And so I think if you're the kind of person that likes seeing an underdog type story, because that's what our characters are, they are hated by everybody, even though they have specific skills they're really good at. Pretty much nobody's on their side, and you have these people who are going up against not only really evil people, but evil people with a lot of power. I will elaborate a little bit more in the spoiler section as to what, throughout the majority of the book, the thing that irritated me the most. I will get into specifics in the spoiler part, but the non-spoiler portion of this, the thing that, besides the stuff I talked about at the beginning, if you watch that, but the thing that really kind of didn't make this book work for me is that I couldn't stand our main character. I didn't hate him initially, and I liked a lot about the very beginning of the book, but later on, I just found him kind of insufferable. He made so many stupid decisions, and this whole premise of there being this blood week, basically, where everybody has the ability to kill whoever, if you will, and he's trying to protect this little girl who he knows tons of people are after. And it's like every single time that somebody shows up and he encounters someone who isn't just, you know, like an assassin or something, if he just runs into somebody, he immediately trusts them. He is like, I guess I'll see where this leads. And then bad stuff happens. And then he tries to get away, and then there are other people, and he's like, I guess I'll follow these people, and then bad stuff happens. And you're like, dude, you know everybody's after this chick on a week where tons of people can go around and kill each other. Why do you keep trusting everybody? It was driving me crazy. And on top of that, we're told throughout the book that people hate him. People hate people who are greatcoats. So not only are you having to worry about people trying to kill this girl, but you know people don't really like you. We get a flashback, too, where you see that people just immediately distrust them. So I'm just like, why do you keep just going along with every single person you meet? I have said many times in book reviews that I can get behind a character being stupid if they learn from it. And there's a part where he is being confronted, and this particular person is telling him, what you just did was really stupid. You're so stupid. They're telling, and I'm like, yes, maybe he'll finally see how stupid he is. And he doesn't. In his head, he's even like, this person's a fool. They still think life's a fairy tale. And I'm just like, come on. So any time in the book that he would have these moments where he's like, I've failed. I didn't end up really feeling bad for him because I was like, yeah, and when you had opportunities to correct the behavior, you didn't. So you didn't correct the behavior all the way to the point of failure, and it wasn't until you failed that you acknowledged oh, I failed. And it wasn't even like I failed because I shouldn't have done all of these things. It was just like, I failed. And I'm like as if he wasn't enough. And it's like, no, it wasn't that you weren't enough. It's that you kept choosing to take the wrong path on purpose. Like, you knew. It wasn't like, I'm going to go left or right. I went left and then they got me. I'm going to get into spoilers now, so if you don't want to be spoiled, don't keep watching. But the particular scene I was referring to when Falkio is being confronted by Aline about how he's being stupid, it, for those that haven't read it in a while, was when he kind of runs into this kid who's like, you're a greatcoat? I'm a greatcoat too. We have lots of greatcoats. And then he's like, okay, let's go see what this is about. And I'm like, let's not. Let's go, like, keep being on the move. Like, I don't know. So I could kind of understand why he would go to at least see what was happening with greatcoats, because what if they are real greatcoats? So he goes along and he gets there and they're not real greatcoats. They're like this weird little new order. And he is just so upset that they are tarnishing the greatcoat's name. And then he demands Lorenzo duels him because the other kid is getting beat up, and he's like, duel me, come on, stop, he's proven he's loyal and great, and I'll fight you, and he's not a coward, I'll fight you. And then the guy's like, okay, and then that guy gets destroyed because Falkio is an actual greatcoat. And there's a lot of people there, and Falkio, the little girl's like, I think we should leave now because he just beat their ruler up, and there's a bunch of people with swords. It even said shortly before this that the odds are, if it's one man against 4, you're going to lose. And now it's 1 against, 30 or whatever. There's a ton of people. And instead of being like, yeah, you're right, we should get out of here, he's like, no, take off your coats. All of you, take off your coats. And he's just so upset that they are wearing these coats. And I'm like, you have bigger problems. You're supposed to protect this little girl. Her life is in danger. And you're freaking out about these people, like, pretending to be greatcoats. And I'm like, get some perspective, man. Right after that. And this is when it really sealed the deal for me, that Falkio was an idiot. So right after that, the little girl, she's yelling at him about how he's so stupid, and he's thinking, like, this little fool girl, she still believes in fairy tales and whatever. And I'm like, dude, what the heck? Don't be so condescending. Like, this little girl's right. But anyway, she starts crying because he's like, well, what do you think I should do then? She's like, I don't know. I'm a kid. You're supposed to be protecting me. And I'm like, that's right, man. You're supposed to be protecting her. You're a grown man. She gets really sad because she's like, I'm going to die, aren't I? I'm going to die. And then he's kind of like, probably are going to die. And then she was like, okay, well then I want you to do it. I would rather you just kill me quick. I'll accept that. I don't want them to take me and torture me. And he's like, oh, like, she's right. They probably will do that to her. And they probably would. So I'm like, okay, so if there is a scene where they are probably going to capture them, it would be really tragic, but I could understand, like, okay, little girl, if this comes to happen, I will do this. That's not what he does, though. What he does is, in that exact moment, when they are not literally being confronted with enemies, they know they're being chased, but there's no one around at that moment, there's no one about to capture them, he gives her that little candy, which that little candy is supposed to basically kill you. He gives her this little candy, and he's about to let this little girl kill herself right then and there. And he just gave up. He's like, you're right, they probably eventually will get us, so you might as well kill yourself now, 12-year-old, 13-year-old girl. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't fight to save my life. I'm super weak, and I would have done a better job protecting Aline. You give that to her, you give it to her, and you tell her, if you are about to be captured, take this. But absolutely, before that, don't, because we have a fighting chance. Like, you give her a chance, and the only reason she doesn't take that right then and there, he's like holding her hand, and he eventually like lets go because he was like, it's her decision. And then some people are like, Aline, we've been so worried about you. And then he's like, who are you people? And then he's distrustful at first, but then he's like, they don't have any weapons on them, so I'm sure it's fine. I'm like, once again, what are you doing? You just decided to go visit these fake greatcoats, and I kind of can understand why he thought maybe everything would be chill with them. It wasn't. And then some other random people show up. They're not armed, and apparently that's all it takes to be considered safe. And he knows there are people who use magic in their world, people that have powder and all sorts of other things besides just a knife or a sword. He's such an idiot. There was another time in the book that I want to mention. So after they do get captured, there's a part where he is being tortured. And currently, all that's happening to him is that he's being beaten a lot. Not that that's nothing, but he's being beat up a lot. And then, you know, like they give them something basically to like keep them awake or give them energy, and then they beat them up some more, and then they just kind of keep doing this to him, which sounds awful. But then the Duchess lady comes in and she gives him the most vile, disgusting, horrifying threat. She's like, I'm going to give you something that's going to make you want to bang people, and I'm going to make you bang children until like they're dead, or like she's giving the most horrific threats. And then right after that, she's like, come, I need you to see something. And then the thing that she's come up with is that she's tortured some horse with her horrifying, crazy lady ideas. And then she kind of is just like, okay, now that little girl, Aline, I'm just going to like give her to the horse unless you like do what I want. And I'm going to push you to your limits. And not to be mean or anything, but first off, those threats were disgusting for sure, and I didn't want to see them happen. But the whole idea of there being another person involved and people being willing to take on pain, but then you bring in someone they love, or you bring in someone innocent, they're like, no, not them, let them go, I'll do anything for you. I'm like, this lady had all sorts of creative ideas, and then she just kind of resorted to the like first one in the book. I don't know. And like I said, not that I wanted to see. And this isn't a complaint. I just found it really almost funny and comical that she gave these terrible threats, and then she was like, let's just have this person you care about be harmed. And it's like, oh, well, that's like what everybody does. As always, when I don't love a book, I encourage all of you who do love it to really talk about everything that you loved about it and what you think makes it an amazing book, because I don't want my review to make somebody think that, you know, like, oh, well, this is what she said, so that's all I need to know. I would love for people to go in with a more balanced perspective. So let me know, let other people know your thoughts on this book, positive or negative or crazy adoring, whatever, wherever you fall with it. But anyway, thanks for watching. Sorry. I hope you guys do like it, and I'll see you later.